Why did you leave Stumptown?
All right. This is the biggest mistake I've made in my career.
The world is obsessed with fast track success. It's easy to think that people become successful overnight. But let's face it, more often than not, what we see on social media is total BS. I'm here to look past the perception of perfect success and focus on life's detours, perceived mistakes, and even wrong choices, and understand the real road traveled up the career ladder. After all, we're all effing up. Laila Ghambari had nearly 20 years of specialty coffee experience. She won the prestigious title of the United States Barista Champion in 2014 and was an elected member of the Executive Council for the Barista Guild from 2012 to 2016. Her expertise is in running multi-unit retail operations, training and education, as well as team and organizational leadership. Just recently, she founded By Laila Ghambari, her coffee business consulting company that supports coffee companies with operations, education, growth, and profitability. Laila, hello. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Let's start by having you share what you're up to today, career-wise.
Yeah, I'm actually in a pretty new venture. I started my own consulting company just about 4 months ago. Very new, learning how to work for myself and own my own business. It has been very challenging, but also really incredible in that 20 years into my career, I feel like for the first time, I'm learning an entirely new skill set, which is business ownership, marketing, a lot of the admin stuff. Consulting right now is my full-time thing. I'm working with different coffee companies and helping them to grow their organization, help with leadership, team leadership, and overall profitability for their coffee shops. So I'm just using my 20 years of specialty coffee experience to help other coffee companies. My experience in coffee is pretty broad. I didn't just work in one specific area of coffee. I've been a barista. I've been in quality control. I've been in training and education and retail operations and team leadership. And so it's allowed for a pretty big breadth of work. Thus, I'm doing a lot of different types of things. As examples, I'm doing one-on-one coaching for coffee business owners, a lot of coffee shop owners, doing strategic planning for small businesses that are trying to grow their coffee presence. And so I'm doing strategic planning with them, as well as helping new coffee shops open, and then doing some brand work with different larger coffee companies that want support with education and recipe development. Every day is a little bit of a different job, and it's been really fun to get to flex all of my different skills.
You must be pretty comfortable with ambiguity.
I'm actually not. And so I am an incredibly fiscally responsible person, and I like to budget every penny. And the fact that I don't know exactly how much money I'm going to make every month is driving me crazy, but I'm doing my best to figure out a system. Same with my day-to-day work. I'm so used to just clocking into a 9 to 5 and knowing what I need to do, but I have to plan my days out where I'm going to give a little bit of time to this job and a little time to this job. And so I'm required to be really flexible, and the control freak that I am is just going crazy, but I'm learning so much, and I'm pushing myself to a place that is just a lot of growth. And I love that.
I'm sure we'll get a little bit more into that as we go chronologically. Think back to your childhood. Do you feel like when you look back, you can think of a time or times that shaped where you are today in terms of your career, or even maybe earlier in your career that brought you today from your childhood?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I grew up with a family of entrepreneurs, a family of business owners. My mother and father started Cherry Street Coffee House when I was in early elementary school. But my father was the general manager and part owner of B&O Espresso, which was one of the first European style cafes to open in Seattle, Washington, and eventually became part owner of a couple of those locations. So I'd been going to work with my dad at his coffee shop since I was a little kid. I wasn't supposed to be going to daycare, but my dad could not leave me if I was crying. So he'd just bring me to work. And I have fond memories of being at the B&O Espresso in the Broadway Market on Capitol Hill, a very iconic space, and sitting on the countertop. And I had one of those Sesame Street Etch-a-Sketch and I'd make pictures and I'd sell them for 5 cents. And then I'd use my 5 cents to buy a small cup of whipped cream with chocolate shavings on top of it from the barista. So I grew up in coffee shops.
Wow.
And so the fact that I'm in coffee, I guess that's
It was meant to be.
it was very meant to be. And getting to see my father be a business owner and an entrepreneur, seeing my mom as well alongside with him is not surprising that I've went into coffee and into entrepreneurship. My brothers have also done the same thing. And all of us pretty much followed in our father's footsteps. And a lot of that is because we were very involved. We were with him all the time. We were in the business. It wasn't something that was separate.
Fascinating. Is Cherry Street still owned by your family?
Yeah. And my father, he started the coffee company. My mother and father started it in the early 90s. And it's still owned by my father. Again, they eventually divorced and she eventually sold her share to the company. So my father is still the owner of the company almost 30 years later. He had 11 cafes before the pandemic. And through the pandemic, ended up closing a lot of those locations, selling them to other people. And so current state is 4 cafes and a commissary is what his current state is. So it survived the pandemic, but barely,
Yeah.
really.
I mean, it's the truth for so many food and beverage
Right.
spots, right?
Yeah.
Such a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about your teenage years. Did you have ideas of what you might do for your future? Did you envision higher education?
Like I said, I'm a total control freak. So I actually knew exactly what was going to happen with my entire life. It was already planned out.
No guy has ever responded that way. So I'm curious to see if it all
I'm
played
a
out.
planner. And when I think something's going to happen or I want to do something, I just do it. There's not really an in between for me. I've learned to let go of things as I've gotten older, but I wanted to be a teacher. That's always what I've wanted to be. I've always worked with young kids. I was babysitting from I was probably 9 when I started babysitting, which doesn't make sense. I think about it now. I would never let a 9-year-old watch my kids, but I was babysitting very young. It was a different time. I worked in daycare centers. I was a nanny and I wanted to go to school and be a preschool kind of early childhood education was the path that I went down. But then I was working in coffee at the same time and it came time for me to do the practicum work where I needed to actually be working full time in childcare and in education. And I realized I just really was having fun with coffee. I was enjoying it. I was only 20 years old. I was working in the city and just having these really fun experiences. And I was like, I'm not ready to be a teacher. And I thought to myself, like, I don't even have kids. Like, I'm not good enough to teach someone's kids when I don't even have my own kids. And so then I'm going to just take a break and see what happens with coffee before I go back and finish my education. And I ended up doing education just in coffee. So most of my career has been in coffee training, barista training, coffee education. And so I guess I still did end up in education in that way, but I'm not teaching little kids. I'm teaching adults.
It looks like you attended Bellevue College. What was the education there?
It was Bellevue Community College when I went there. It eventually became not a community college anymore. But my older brother was the first person in our family to get a college degree. My father is an immigrant, didn't go to college. He went to technical school. Same with my mother. She worked at Boeing, but she went to technical school for computer skills. So my brother graduated with his master's in business, and he was the first person to graduate. And I never felt pressure to go to school. College was not something in my family that was pushed or pressured or any way. I just figured I would. Of course, I'm going to graduate. I'm going to go to college. That was just the path that I assumed I would take. And it was necessary to do the job that I wanted to do. But I didn't end up graduating. So when I went to school, I did my first couple years at Bellevue College and then I went into coffee and I didn't go back for my degree. I will say this has been something that's been interesting. I never cared that I didn't have a college degree because working in coffee, everyone had college degrees and they were working in coffee. And I was like, what does it matter? I don't have college debt and I'm doing the same thing. And a lot of people that were working in coffee had degrees that were English lit or this or that were just like, I don't even know if I'm going to ever use this degree.
Yeah.
And so it never bothered me until I got to a more elevated position when I started getting into executive level roles. I realized that people would ask about where you went to college. And I was like, I didn't go to college. And they were like, wait, what? That you didn't go to college? Like you didn't finish, you don't have a degree. It became something where I was like, oh no, should I actually be worried about this? Or am I not going to get jobs because I don't have a college degree? I've found ways to have that conversation, and it isn't a hindrance at all because I have 20 years of experience, but it's definitely something where I didn't realize would eventually come into play later
Yeah, you
on,
would
but it
think it
took
would be
almost 20 years.
an earlier formative experience. Yeah, that's
Exactly.
fascinating. It's very clear that well, I don't want to sound like curt or cute about it. Like it doesn't matter for you in your career.
Yeah.
Like it was not going to be a game changer. You had your game changing without that piece of education. And
Yeah. And I think that's partially to do with the opportunities that I was given. I actually recall a very important moment in my career when I was the director of education and training operations for Stumptown Coffee Roasters, and I moved into the director of cafes position. And the reason that role change happened was actually because of restructuring in the business. There was going to be a layoff because they were doing restructuring and the wholesale department was not performing the way that it used to, especially coffee. And so I had to have a conversation about laying off about half my team, which is about 11 people at that time. And I took the weekend to just think about it. I was actually pregnant at the time. And I was like, I'm going to be going on maternity leave. Maybe I'll just ask them to lay me off and I have got a career. It'll be easy for me to find new work and my salary would probably make it so we don't have to lay as many people off. But then I started to think about the whole company and I was like, I really see a need in retail. Like they don't quite have the team that I think that they should have. And so I'm just going to throw out the idea of me taking a role in the retail department to release some of the pressure from the wholesale channel. And they ended up loving that idea. And so I moved into the director of retail position. And my boss, who was my boss for education in the sales channel, he said to me, "You're about to get your MBA." And I didn't have any idea what he was really talking about at that time. But then getting thrown into leading a $12 million revenue multi-unit retail business across the United States, managing double-digit teams and managing all these businesses. Absolutely. Especially when I started that job in 2020, the very beginning of 2020. And my entire experience
it
within that
wasn't
retail
just the
department
MBA, it
was
was the MBA plus the next 2,
yeah,
4 years of the job that you get after the MBA, right? It was the
exactly.
full package.
It
I'm
was the full package.
I want to double click on something you said that I think is quite interesting. You said it's because of the roles I've been given instead of
Mm,
saying the roles I've earned.
mm.
So
Yeah, you got me
automatic,
there.
right? Yeah. It
Yeah.
points out this preconceived notion that we have. We're just so wired. You don't even realize you're
Mhm.
doing it. You were given something versus you worked your ass off for this. In fact, it was
Yeah.
your idea. You presented it. You handed it
Yeah.
to them as a gift on a silver platter, and yet you're giving them all the credit. Like it's
I
very
know.
classic what we do.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I actually just had this conversation with my dear friend yesterday where I was mentioning to her that I am doing a coaching session with someone that I actually look up to. And I was like, why in the world would they hire
Mm.
me to coach them? Like, I find them to be like the most aspirational person. And my friend was like, listen, you have something to offer them. That's why they hired you. And I was just like, do I really now? So, yes, I think, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know where that idea that I can't just be proud and feel good about the work that I've done and deserved. But and it's not that I don't. I know that I've worked hard and
Of
I know that I
course.
deserve these things.
I don't think it's about
Absolutely.
you. I think it's about
Right.
society, about how we're hardwired.
Yeah. To be humble and to, you know, feel fortunate, which I do. But I could also just speak openly and say, yeah, I absolutely deserve those positions. And
I also just told you
I gave
we're
them
not here
many
to
of
talk about your successes. So, but
that's
I
true.
also, I'm going to throw a stereotype out there, but also as a female, like
Absolutely.
I felt through my career that I wouldn't talk about the things I was doing. And now, decades into my career, I realize there's a difference between being braggadocious and
Mhm.
self promoting the work you've done,
Right.
and that there's a difference and it matters. But
Yeah.
I never wanted to talk about anything I did really well because I thought,
Mhm.
oh no, I'm going to be seen as like super flashy and that's going to gross people out. I think back and I'm like, oh, so many missed opportunities because what? I was trying to be a meek little lamb, which I'm absolutely not.
Exactly. No, and I actually, again, I'm in this state where I'm doing consulting, and my entire career in coffee, a significant portion of my time has been giving back to the coffee community. I've been on the executive council for the Barista Guild of America. I've run my own sort of community driven events and things like that. I had to start an organization called the Coffee Woman that was all about networking for women in coffee. And that's been really important. Again, that is very much taught to me by my father. My father is from Iran. He started the Iranian American Community Organization. He
Oh,
runs an
wow.
Iranian festival every year. I grew up
That's
in
amazing.
community organization. And so it became very natural for me to do the same thing. And what I'm doing right now, I'm obviously where I'm making money is working with businesses, but what I'm using as an opportunity to use my platform is to talk about career development for baristas because I've mostly worked in retail. I've mostly worked with baristas and their career development is really important to me because it's also building up our future leaders. And we need baristas to see themselves as future leaders and for the specialty coffee industry to continue to grow because, man, like ideas and all of that is coming from these next generations. And I want to see them see themselves in the future. One of the things I talk about really openly about right now online is how to grow your career. And part of that is not gatekeeping that information and me telling people what my career trajectory has looked like and when I made certain amounts of money, which is not
Yeah,
something we talk about.
I saw
Right?
that post where you had the numbers that equated like
Yeah.
the numbers of years and you talked about your six figures when you hit that. And
Yeah.
I was like, wow, this is a very bold toast. But I know that a lot of people, particularly in your industry, have to be
Mhm.
so thirsty for that information.
They absolutely are. And I talk with so many baristas and it's two different things. It's baristas who are very new to the career and they think they should be progressing faster. And the reality is it just takes a lot of time. And working as a barista for 2 years is like the equivalent to nothing. You have to work much longer in the industry to gain the experience and knowledge that can step you into team leadership and business development, all those types of things. So it takes a long time. But you also have to be seeking out those opportunities. The other side of that are people that I talk to who have been a barista for 12 years or a cafe manager for 9 years. And I'm like, you need to move on. If you want to grow your career, you got to start doing something because being a barista or a cafe manager for 9, 12 years is just you have the skill set that you should be taking those next steps. So what are those opportunities? And talking about money, a lot of people think that you can't make good money in coffee. And the reality is you can. And I don't even have a college degree and I am able to do that. And so what has gotten me there, those are the things that I want to share with people so that they see this as a career path for themselves.
Okay. I realize that we haven't even started on
We haven't, I know.
I'm sorry. Okay. I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I'd like to understand the journey of you started and did a little bit of college, but you didn't graduate because you were enjoying the coffee setting. What made you decide to say, see a coffee? And did you have any regrets about that
Yeah.
initially? I know we talked about the later, but right after you got out
Yeah.
of there.
Like I said, I wanted to be a preschool teacher. So I
Yeah.
thought I'll just take some time off. I'll get married and have kids, and then I'll go back to school and be a teacher. I was enjoying coffee. I was making good money for even being a barista with making tips and all that sort of stuff. I actually was a live-in nanny as well. And so I was living with a family and doing nanny work, but I was also working at a coffee shop that was nearby. I started competing in barista competitions. I'm a very competitive person. And so when I was in high school, I was on the debate team and I did mock trial. And then I've done street bike racing. I've always been really competitive.
Wow.
So when I got into coffee full time, I was like, how do you compete in coffee? What do I have to do to compete? What is the
What
thing?
are the things?
How do I make this a competition? And there's barista competitions. That was actually the catalyst for a lot of my career growth because when I competed in my first barista competition, I competed alongside a coffee shop owner who, after the competition, offered me a position. And that was the first time where I was recruited into a coffee company that was highly specialty, that was growing, and they wanted me to work for their company. And so that was like the step into, okay, this is going to be my career.
Where were you
That
living at
was
the time in Seattle?
I was actually in Kirkland. So I was in
Yeah.
suburbs outside of Seattle during that time when I was a live-in nanny and working at a coffee shop there. And I moved to Portland to go work for a coffee company called Barista. And that was when I think I became an adult
Mm.
because it was the first time I moved away from home. It was only Portland, 3 hours away, but it was huge for me to leave my
Yeah.
family, leave where all my family was. And my dad still talks about this. He took me to Portland and moved me into the house that I was renting. And he tells me now, he was like, I was just going to be like, you can just get in the car and we can go back to the house. You can't live here. This is terrible. I lived in the basement of this older woman's home and she had all these weird rescue cats. The worst case scenario, living in a windowless basement in a weird cat lady's house. That was my dad moved me into. First time being away from my family. And he moved me there and he was just like, no, like you got to leave. But I was like, I got this. It's going to be fine. The coffee shop did not open right away. It took 2 months and I didn't, so I wasn't making any money living in this basement. I ended up getting really sick and I'd never been sick away from my family. And I like had to figure out how to like go to the doctors. It's just funny to think back on it now, but I just didn't know how to do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so that time period was rough because I had to learn it all. I stopped paying for my car insurance because I just thought you could stop paying for it when you didn't have a car anymore. Things like that. I made so many mistakes, but I didn't know what I was doing. I overdrafted my bank account for the first time, like just making all of those decisions or mistakes you make when you're young and you just don't know and you're figuring it all out. So that period of time was a lot of learning, a lot of figuring it out and challenges of leaving home. And then once the coffee shop opened, then I created my own little ecosystem there. I had my work and it was close by and recreated that. But that period of time of leaving home was a big challenge for me. My family's very close as well. So I didn't do a lot for myself until I finally actually moved away from home. Yeah.
In the job, when the shop finally opened, what challenges did you find in that work?
It was a great coffee shop in hindsight. Now, as an older adult, I realized that was a really toxic work environment. There was a lot of, honestly, now I know it, but it was sexual harassment. It was a really toxic place. It was run by a bunch of men and I was the only girl and things were just uncomfortable. And I just didn't know it at the time. And I just thought it was guys being weird and
Yeah.
funny. And I was uncomfortable, but I didn't really understand why I was uncomfortable. And that is actually something that I talk very openly about now because I didn't know that it was inappropriate for your boss to make sexual jokes about things in the coffee shop because I just thought you're allowed to do whatever you want to. You own the business. And now I recognize that's completely inappropriate. And I am now someone who will make everyone else feel uncomfortable. If you say something that's inappropriate, I'll make sure that everybody knows you said something inappropriate. And I actually really pride myself on that because growing up as a woman in the work world, I've experienced a lot of situations where men get to say things or do things that are really inappropriate and make people feel uncomfortable. And we're supposed to just say nothing and let them do it.
Okay. Example that you can share that you recall from those times of something when like looking back, you're like, oh, I wish I'd said something.
Absolutely. Yeah. When in a coffee shop, you work on the bar with someone else. So you're really close with them and
Yeah.
you're making coffee. And there was this game that they would play where when a woman would walk in the coffee shop, they would say how many times they would have sex with her. They would say a number, like they'd yell out a number. And I would just be uncomfortable making coffee, but I just didn't know that was not okay. I recognized that I didn't feel comfortable, but I didn't recognize that is not an okay thing to do. And I didn't know that I could say something or that sort of thing.
Why did you leave that coffee shop and where did you go from there?
I moved on because I was ready to start my own coffee shop, which again, I thought after being a barista for a few years, I should run a coffee shop, which is funny to me now where I'm like, I didn't know anything about anything. I should never have owned a coffee shop. Thankfully, I didn't open a coffee shop, but I moved back to Seattle and I was taking a small business course at the community college and I was working at Stumptown Coffee Roasters. 6 months into that, I actually moved back to Portland because I was still worked for Stumptown, but I had started dating my now husband who was living in Portland. I moved to Seattle. We started dating. And then 6 months later, so I moved back to Portland, still working for Stumptown. I moved back and forward from Seattle and Portland actually quite often. It was such a fun place to work. It was so busy back then. This was 2010, 11, which is like, I feel like a little bit of the heyday. It was right after they were originally acquired by TSG. And so it became a little bit more professional. We like started to have like profit sharing and things like that. So it was still that kind of punk rock coffee company, but then these more corporate qualities to it. At Stumptown, this is a funny thing. At Stumptown, full time was 4 days a week. Baristas worked 4 days a week. But when I moved to Portland, I said, I need to work 5 days a week. That's my full time job is being a barista. And they're like, people only work 4 days a week because they're like musicians or artists. And like, I'm not a musician. I'm not an artist. I'm a full time career coffee person. So I'd love to work 5 days a week. So I was the only person in the entire company as a barista that worked 5 days a week. And I loved that job. It was about a year and a half into that when I was offered my first, when I earned, changed my,
Whatever word.
I earned my first like salary out of the cafe shift work role. And I was an educator for Cafe Ladro up in Seattle, which was a
Fascinating.
multi-unit, 12 cafes. And so I became the educator for that company.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
Cafe Ladro in Seattle.
Yeah.
Where is your now husband when you're
He
doing
moved
this?
up with me to
Oh,
Seattle.
we did. Okay.
That was a big change in our life, moving back up to Seattle, and we ended up staying in Seattle for a long period of time. So I worked at Cafe Ladro for almost 2 years. I was the educator. We had 12 cafes. I built their education program. And then I got recruited by my own father to come work for him at Cherry Street. He like had an intervention lunch with me, which is hilarious. He asked me to come out to lunch with him, and we were like having lunch. What? Okay, so we're just having lunch. This is so weird. Why did you like formally invite me to lunch? We have lunch all the time. He's like, okay, I need you to stop working for my competitor and come work for me. So it's like, oh, okay, Dad, no problem, Dad. I can do that. That's when very end of 2013, I started working for my father at Cherry Street Coffee House, basically doing everything coffee related for him because he owned a coffee shop, but he wouldn't say he was like a coffee person. So I came on and supported with the coffee side of things, helping with equipment and cafe build outs. And
Is this when the little shop was open down in Pioneer Square and there was like this like new vibe with like food offerings and whatnot?
oh yeah, Cherry Street Public House was a new concept we opened, and that was in 2017. Yeah. So I started working for my father in 2014. And then 2017, we opened Cherry Street Public House, which was essentially my father gave me the opportunity to open up a new concept that was like, what if I was to take his concept and modernize it? That was what Cherry Street Public House was. Really amazing location in the Occidental Park, Pioneer Square. Such a beautiful cafe. All the windows opened up to the park. It was so beautiful.
Yeah.
We had such a fun time that we're serving Persian food, which was really fun to bring in my dad's heritage into that.
Yeah.
And that was, wow, talk about a learning opportunity. I've been working in coffee. I've been an educator. I'm running my father's businesses, doing all that. And I'm going to open up this new concept. And I opened it. I didn't literally own it, but I did everything like it was my business. I poke fun at my dad now because I'm like, why did you let me do that? I spent all of your money and I had no idea what I was doing and I wasted all of your money. Why did you let me open that business? It was not profitable. I was not running it correctly. I had no idea what I was doing to run a profitable business. I knew how to run a coffee shop. I knew how to run a coffee company. I knew how to lead a team. I knew food and beverage. I knew design. I did not know anything about business. And that was the key thing that I had missed my entire growth career. Is I was so focused on coffee, on design, on customer service, all of these things that matter so much to the coffee shop, but I knew nothing about the business side of things. And when I did finally work for Stumptown running their retail businesses and diving into the business side of things, I looked back on that and was just like, wow, I would do everything different. I would still design it the same way and do all that, but there would have been so many things I would have done differently. But you don't know that when you're in it. And I feel fortunate that my father let me, like, I could have taken your business. That could have been, I remember how much money we were losing a month. Like that really could have taken your business. Like you probably shouldn't have. A good leader would have not let me do that because it was affecting the rest of your business. I eventually left because I started to notice there was a tension between me and my father. And it was because I wanted to run I wanted to start going this direction, but he was like, I'm still very much running my own business. And I have a really great relationship with my father. And I didn't want that working environment to destroy our personal relationship. And so we started to talk and was like, okay, if I can find another opportunity, I think it's probably best that I step away, let you continue to run your business, and I go find another opportunity. And that was when I came back to Stumptown. So then I moved back to Portland. Again.
And you were at STEMtown for almost 5 years. On paper, that looks like really good and positive. I'm
Yeah.
curious, were there challenges and struggles during those almost nearly 5 years?
Stumptown was my favorite company to work for. They were just the best company. The people were great. The company benefits, everything, the way they ran the business. I really enjoyed my time there. When I moved into retail was when I would say the sort of learning curve set in for me for multiple reasons. When I left education, I was 8 months pregnant with my second child. And so I started in the retail department and about a month later went on maternity leave. That decision of changing departments and having to go through the layoff period and all that sort of stuff while I was 9 months pregnant, let's just say there's a lot of crying. It's incredibly emotional time. And moving into retail while I was like, there was that short period of time before I went on maternity leave where I just met everybody. And it was just like, okay, I'm like 9 months pregnant. I ended up being a little over 2 weeks overdue. And so it was just a stressful time. And then I came back from maternity leave in January of 2020. It was the first time I had my son while I was working at Cherry Street and I was working for my family business. I took some time off and then I started working part-time and then I came back and I would bring him a couple days a week. And so I had a lot more flexibility. I obviously couldn't bring my child with me to work at Stumptown. And it was my first real time of transitioning from having an infant at home and going back to work. They were great with accommodating everything, but like pumping every 3 hours
Yeah,
when you're like
there's nothing good
starting in a
about
new
pumping except
department.
for it gives your child nourishment. That's it. It's
That's
just,
it.
yeah,
Yes,
it's an ordeal.
absolutely. That whole time. I will say one of the things about having children and all of that was a really positive thing for me is I would sit there when I was pregnant and I'd be in a room with like my boss and other coworkers and I'd just be like, I'm working here doing the same thing you guys are doing, but I'm also like forming an umbilical cord and a brain stem and all of these things. I'm like, man, I'm such a bad
I am building a person right
I'm
now.
building a person while I'm also doing this job. And then coming back to work and pumping, I'm like, I am sustaining another human's life while I also am doing my job and I'm doing a great job at it. And my mind is elsewhere because I'm just always thinking about my kids and how they're doing and all these things. But it's also incredibly stressful. Then the pandemic happened. So March 2020, we went fully remote and I was with my kids, my 3-year-old and my 6-month-old baby running retail in a pandemic in a brand new role team that I just started leading, business that I just started managing and navigating all of that was going back to that, getting my MBA. It was like MBA and throwing in the deep end when you don't know how to swim and just having to figure it all out. During that time, it was so stressful. Honestly, I think that if I really dive into it, I'll probably start crying because I know that there's some PTSD involved in that because it's just a level of stress I just couldn't imagine. I'm taking care of my 6-month-old baby. We don't have childcare. We're both working from home. We don't even know what's going on in the world. And I'm trying to run these retail businesses that are in New York City and Los Angeles and everywhere. I was learning business in a pandemic that no one really knew how to do. It was the most stressful time of my life. It was really grueling. I cried a lot. I cried a lot with people in the team. I met with everybody over Zoom and it required that I have so much empathy because I was living in rural Southwest Washington where I live in Ridgefield. People weren't wearing masks at the grocery store even in 2020 because that's what people did here, where my coworkers were living in New York City, where they were deathly afraid to leave their homes and there was lines to get groceries. And I had to put myself in their situation because it wasn't the same experience that I was having at all. I live on 5 acres. I was walking around, enjoying myself. If anything, I was actually having a good time because I was just hanging out with my 6-month-old. I didn't have to pump and all these things, but I had to lead a team that was not having that same experience. It was so challenging, but wow, I feel like a different person, a different leader.
You really took me back to that time. It's interesting how easy it is to forget now, but that time, you and I were living parallel lives. I had a
Mm,
infant as well. In March, my second born would have been 4 months old, and I had gone back to
mm,
work a month prior. I shortened my parental leave because I was like, "Oh, I'll take time in the summer. I'll travel to see my parents." Da, 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 da. Cute. Yeah, that was
yeah.
that came to a screeching halt. Never happened. I actually had been working remotely since 2015, so working remotely for me was like I was like normal,
Mm,
fine, but I
right.
had to care for people across the nation. That we had a huge
Wow.
in New York City, and I was worried the most
Yeah.
for them. Like, I was very worried
Yeah.
for parents because parents were working, educating, preschooling,
Hmm.
like all the things.
Yeah.
I haven't really thought about that in a very long time. That was a lot to bear.
There's a lot.
And my husband and I were working shifts. Oh, yeah, let's not go into
Let's not go into, I know, that's what I'm saying. I don't
that.
like to talk about it too
But
deeply.
yeah, you came out on the other side. Like, damn, I could take this on.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um,
absolutely.
why did you leave Stumptown?
All right. This is the biggest mistake I've made in my career. I wouldn't say it's a mistake. I'll tell you. I'll explain. And then I had another baby. So I'm working at some town. I'm in the retail department and I have my third child. I had been working in retail mostly through the pandemic. It was 2020, 2021, and then I had my son early 2022. And so my time at some town retail was all through the pandemic and it wasn't positive. It was a really hard, challenging time. I felt really good about the work that I'd done. We had made big changes and profitability of the stores was doing well, but it was just really stressful. And so once I had my third kid, while I was on maternity leave, I was just like, I don't know if I can go back. When I look at those stores, I don't have a positive connotation with them. I just think of stress. And I knew that it was probably time for me to move on, not because the company had done anything, not that things weren't good, but I just felt like I had now a negative connotation with the business and the work that I do because of the pandemic. So the idea of starting somewhere else and having a fresh perspective and not having to associate pandemic with this job was something that I felt like was going to be necessary. As soon as I got back from maternity leave, I was reached out to by a former coworker who was working for a new startup. And I came in and met with them. I was like, I just got back from maternity leave. I really don't think it's time for me to take on something new. But they were like, just come in and meet with us. So I went and had some meetings. And on paper, this company sounded incredible and like the opportunity of a lifetime. It was a acquisition company. They had acquired a couple coffee companies, roasting companies, and they were going to open up cafes across the world. Then decks that I was looking at that they were showing me was 135 cafes in the next 5 years. And when I was considering moving on, I was like, who would I work for? Because other than Stumptown in Portland, there's not really another coffee company that was big enough that I would want to work for that I knew could pay me what I wanted to make or what I was making. And so I was like, I don't really know what my options are. And then this kind of fell on my lap and I was like, this is it. This is the opportunity to get in at ground level for something that's about to be huge. And I ended up taking the position. I should not have left. I didn't know that at the time. I did know it at the time, but I did it anyway. Honestly, I knew I shouldn't have taken it. I had a 4-month-old baby and I was about to take on running the retail department for an incredibly fast growing startup. That was not what I should have done with my time. At that moment, I should have said no. I should have sat for a little bit. I should have been more patient. And I knew that, but my ambition just
But
got the best of
you're
me.
talking about you shouldn't have, but what happened?
I took the job. I left Stumptown. I left a really great job. I had just been moved into a new position. I was not going to be managing team people anymore. Like they recognized that I was burnt out from managing the team and they changed my position. I was the retail experience director and was going to be focused on the stores, not necessarily managing the team. I took director of retail for this new coffee company. It was called Coffee Business. It's part of Sortis Holdings. They owned Water Avenue Coffee Roasters, CC Motor Coffee, Spoken Moto, a lot of different. They had bought and acquired a number of different, especially coffee brands. I worked there for a year, and it was not what it was on paper. Was not the reality. You can look up articles online, but Sortis Holdings really was moved too quickly, didn't have the money to do what they wanted to do, and things fell apart. It was a waste of a year. It was a lot of building things that never happened. We never opened up a single store. I actually closed 4 stores. And I did all of that while, again, having a 4-month-old baby. I was pumping in the car, driving from cafe to cafe and not sleeping and trying to do all that while a pretty toxic work environment. It was really stressful. And eventually, about a year later, they ended up laying off the whole coffee department and eventually laid off a majority of the employees in the company. So it was, again, I knew I shouldn't have taken the job. I'm just an ambitious person and I wanted the opportunity to start something, to be there at the ground up. I literally said YOLO. That's like
But
what I said out loud.
I'd argue it gives you perspective. Sure, shoulda, coulda, woulda, but this is the whole point of the podcast, is that these
Yeah,
fuck ups bring the success. If you didn't experience
absolutely.
the hell, you wouldn't understand the heaven moments.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
It's
and
why I don't regret it. It's not a regret. I don't regret it, but I'm glad I did it. I learned a lot. But I also feel like I'm lying if I say I wish I didn't do it because it was so stressful. And I don't think I deserved that amount of stress. But I didn't know that. I wouldn't have known that the company was
Yeah.
going to be what it
No.
was. So that's just circumstantial. My entire career has been about grow, develop, learn, push yourself, grow your career. You have these opportunities and this talent that like you're going to get these opportunities. You should take them. But the reality is that I also can just say no. And I wish I could have accepted safe and comfortable for a little bit. I would say that was the worst year of my life because of how stressful it was. It was so stressful. It also didn't go the way I wanted it to. So that was disappointing. And then I was just exhausted from having 3 kids, an infant, pumping, just all of that stuff was just so stressful. And so it was a bad year.
You mentioned the culture was toxic. Can you describe that a little bit more?
There was very poor communication in the company. And for a startup where no one knew what was going on, we were just constantly in the dark about what was happening. We're always waiting for funding. We're always waiting for this or that. And there was a lot of businesses. It wasn't just coffee, it was food and it was hotels. And they didn't communicate. There wasn't a lot of departmental communication. There was a lot of secrecy. And it just resulted in everyone constantly being like, are we going to have a job tomorrow? Are our paychecks going to go through? Are we going to open this store? Are we going to close this store? And I think the biggest feather in my cap through that experience is that I somehow managed to keep my team. I didn't have any turnover in my management team for that entire year when literally we're in the dark about everything and we were constantly waiting for something to happen. I actually feel guilty about that in hindsight because they probably should have left, but I was just doing my job and I believed there was something next because on paper, it looked like it was all there, but it wasn't all there. I was there for a year. I never spoke with the company CEO until about the very last month or two. So there just wasn't desire to build relationship with the employees. And that's just not how I operate. Yeah, it was a terrible work environment. And it's that company is experiencing what happens when that's how you operate.
I'm not going to lead a horse to water, though I want to. Why did your time come to an end there?
So I was eventually laid off. They laid off most of the coffee department was the department that went first because it had the biggest growth plan that really didn't materialize at all. And so they were just way too fat. And so my son and 2 other of my coworkers were laid off on the same day. That layoff was, again, I didn't realize how stressed out I was. I didn't realize how toxic and just constant stress I had. I remember the weeks afterwards, just not knowing what to do with myself and almost detoxing. It was so emotionally draining because I just was in it. So I didn't realize how stressful it was. And so to just not have to deal with that, I was like, wow. And it was a lot of crying. It was a lot of working through the emotions of the last year and then figuring out what was next, like immediately going into, okay, what am I going to do now? It was drawn out. There were some things that had to be worked out. It made me decide to start my own business. And I never would have done this if I wasn't laid off. My life has always been, what's the next career move? What's the next career move? I'm going to work my way up the ladder. I'm working up to CEO someday. That's where I was going.
Do you envision that what you're doing now is your indefinite future, or do you have inklings to go back to corporate at some point?
I don't know yet. I'm like I said, I started this like officially like October. I'm about less than 4 months into this. It's going better than I imagined it would. I've replaced and exceeded my previous income. So I feel really good about where I'm at. I'm
Amazing.
really happy with that. But the uncertainty of just constantly having to be finding work and waiting for something to come. Self doubt is a pretty heavy thing in my life. And so I'm just, okay, what if it just all goes away? And I'm like constantly thinking about what could happen. And I don't love that part. Maybe I'll grow out of that. Maybe I'll find a rhythm and that will go away, but it feels like that's prominent right now. And so I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this is my forever thing. I'm actually in the process of my lifelong goal always has been to own a coffee company. And some opportunities have recently come about that I think that's probably the path I'm going to go down. I think I'll probably keep consulting to some degree, but I don't think it'll be my full-time thing. But the idea of going back to a full-time like corporate job, that doesn't feel like it's going to happen again for me. I really value that I don't report to anybody anymore.
What do your kids think you do for work?
My kids think I work at a coffee shop, which I work at a coffee shop. But man, that being a working mom is incredibly challenging. I say this as a working mom. I'm sure working fathers experience the same thing, but not to the degree that in my family, at least. My husband traveled a lot. And so he's gone away from the kids, and that's stressful for them and for him. But just this morning, all my kids are in my bed and they're like, why do you have to work? Grandma didn't work. And just like the constant guilt of like, why can't you just, I'm like explaining it to them. And so then we wouldn't have this and we wouldn't be able to do that. And they don't really care. And I'm like, shoot, should I just be a stay-at-home mom? Is that what I'm supposed to do? But the reality is I love working. I
Yep.
absolutely love having a job.
You're
I
your
don't want to
best
be a
self
stay-at-home
because you're
mom.
doing what you enjoy.
Exactly. And it's just something where I have to like, I want to feel sad and lean into that. And then I just have to recognize, okay, I can find balance. And I have more so in this later part of my life, found much more balance in being a mom and growing my career, setting boundaries, turning things off when it's the right time. When my kids need me, I shut things off and they will ultimately be the number one priority. But it's just always a struggle to figure out the balance.
I have some rapid fire questions. Okay. How do you define
Okay.
success?
How do I define success? Wow. At this moment in my life, I would define success as the ability to find balance with being a mom and having a career. That would be success to me right now.
As a young kid, what was your dream job?
My dream job was to have a preschool. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to work with little kids. I've always wanted to work with little kids, and which is funny now because my kids drive me absolutely crazy.
I assume the next question I would ask is, what's your path not taken? So I assume you'd say preschool teacher or teacher.
Yeah. But I think the other sort of path not taken yet, but TBD is a business owner. That's my whole family is entrepreneurs. And I think being a owner of a successful business is very much the path that I have yet to achieve.
What 3 words would you use to describe your career?
Ambitious, collaborative, and I don't know, expected.
How is stress most typically manifest?
I have just like constantly. So I'm very introverted. I need alone time. And so stress manifests for me of don't touch me, don't talk me. I'm out of here. I need to be alone. I feel like I have to be alone. It's like a necessity. And so if I'm not getting that and I just feel overwhelmed, I have to go take a breather. I need alone time. And having 3 kids does not help that. So not going like it's being work. That could be work could be great and that could be stressful or vice versa. But it really manifests in a overwhelming, just this feeling like I can't breathe, overwhelming. And so the way that I deal with it is that I need to be completely alone. And that can be going on a walk. Thrifting is my favorite. I love just rifling through. I don't even need to buy anything. Just looking at every single shirt on a hanger. That is decompression to me.
Awesome. What is the company on your resume that has turned the most heads?
I think Stumptown, it's the name that I think is the most prominent. And then the progression that I had there I think really speaks to
Mhm.
my skill set. And so I think that's probably been the one that I hang my hat on the most. Not company wise, being the United States Barista Champion definitely is one that people
Yeah.
forgot
So
that.
it's
It was
no
10
small
years
title.
ago, but it's no small title. It was 10 years ago. So I almost am a little embarrassed that I still talk about it, but it was
Listen,
such an accolade that
It lasts forever.
it'll be on my tombstone.
I have 3 labels that I'd like you to apply to 3 jobs. Love, ultimate fun, skip.
Okay. Skip easy is going to be coffee business. I would skip that heartbeat. Love. I would actually put love on working for Cherry Street. I loved working for my father. And I think that time I look back on with more affection than any other position because it was my family's business. So then I would add fun to Stumptown. That was a really fun place to work. Other than obviously the pandemic experience, I look back on that and just have so many positive memories. So that was definitely fun. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. This was,
Oh, no, thank
it's always
you.
fun to do this.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Effing Up. I'm your host, Deanne Reiner. If you enjoyed today's episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe on the platform you use to listen to podcasts. Share Effing Up with others, post about it on social media, and or leave a rating and review. Until next time, count your perceived failures as part of your path to success. After all, we're all effing up.